Hi, everybody. I think I'm live. Am I live? No. Yes. Maybe. There we go. I think I am live. Welcome and thank you for coming to join me for this CSS custom properties introduction slash intermediate slash maybe deep dive. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you are here, you can say hi in the chat. I had to change, well, I changed my setup a little bit for this one because I wanted to be able to do the slides. I think this is going to work better. But I'm going to be looking around a lot because I have to be looking at my other screen now a bit more than I'm used to. And it looks like there's already some people jumping in on here. So I'm going to not get started right away. It's only 8:50 or 8:48. So I'm going to wait about 10 minutes to jump into this. Do I have another screen I could jump to for the moment? Can we do that one? We could do that one. There we go. So I'll jump over to this for now, just while we chat and hang out. So if you have any questions or anything about maybe the course for now, or other things you'd like to talk about, let me know. We can sort of get into that or just chit chat as we wait for people to jump on into here. But I do want to say thank you for coming on this Friday morning. I'm a little bit groggy, I won't lie. It'll make me slow down a little bit as we go over some of the material. It is 9 o'clock in the morning. I should be awake by now. But anyone who's been at my Twitch streams knows that sometimes I'm a little sleepy in the mornings. Hi, Jeff. Nice to see you here. I'm glad that you're enjoying my live streams, Jeff. It's nice seeing you around everywhere. Hi there, John. Thank you for jumping on in. And actually, I'm going to move my chat over because you can't see it. There we go. We'll put it over here for now. Hi there, Lewis. Luis Francisco, how are you doing? How's everyone this morning? Anyone up to anything fun on this Friday? I was gonna say Friday. One problem with live streaming is I never know if some of you it might even be Saturday already. And if it is, I'm jealous. No, good question, John. Okay. For the course, I've decided, and it is the dates that I mentioned last time. So the 19th will be when the course goes on sale to the greater public, and the 26th of October will be when the material is available to everybody. I was thinking about making it available earlier to you guys, but because there's the live streams that will be happening with the release of each week's content, or at the end of each week's content, I'm going to keep you guys all on the same schedule because I think it's going to be a little bit easier to do it that way. So the course will officially launch on the 26th of October. I keep making changes as I'm going through the course, so I still have a lot of material to prepare for it, but we should be perfectly fine. I brought someone to help me a little bit with some extra designs, so we have some more projects to work on, which should be good, and it sort of frees me up. Hi there, Nils. Welcome. And as far as the course content is going to go, the reason I'm doing this one is even in the first week, I sort of decided that it would be a good idea to use a lot of custom properties. And even in the lessons where I'm using them, I am explaining a little bit, but I'm not touching on the basics of it. I'm diving in and assuming people know how to use them. So I 100% realize that not everyone's going to be super comfortable with custom properties. So I wanted to have material there. So if somebody's like, I have no idea what he's talking about, that they can dive into it. And we're going to I was going to keep this to like the basic into intermediate, and then in the course we were going to go into some of the cooler stuff, but instead I think it's always better when you reinforce things a little bit. So I'm going to go through a lot of I'm going to start the very basics, but by the end of the lesson I have planned, we're going to get into similar to how I'm actually using it in the course, but on a smaller scale, because we're just looking at a kind of basic example. Hi there, Dickie. Welcome. Good evening. Where are you in the world? Davor, you have both my Scrimba course and CSS Demystified. Which one would be a better one to start with? I guess it depends a little bit on where you are with... If you've already been writing CSS, I would maybe start with CSS Demystified and then go into Scrimba. And I think that you would probably get through the Scrimba content quicker that way. If you're relatively new to CSS, maybe start with the Scrimba stuff, because the Scrimba stuff starts from like pretty much zero, right? Or especially if you do the free crash course first, where it really starts at 0. For CSS Demystified, I'm assuming people have already been writing CSS and they're just getting really frustrated with it. So this is really put together at that point where you've hit the wall a little bit and you realize it's more complicated than you think. If you haven't got to that complicated stage yet, you can start. And this course is going to be less on, we're going to be using things like Flexbox, and I'm going to explain, we're going to look at Flexbox and understand Flexbox and Grid. But I'm not going to be diving into all the syntax of it. Whereas, we're going to be using it and I'll be explaining everything I'm doing. So I'm not going to leave anyone in the dark, especially with, I guess, the Flex material. But I think I do more of a deep dive on the specifics of each one of those. But they're a little bit different. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, I would say if you're newer to CSS, the Scrimba course is probably a little bit better. If you're writing CSS, but you're frustrated by CSS, this one's probably better. Prabin, welcome. I'm doing great. A little tired, but I'm doing good. Nepal. What time is it over in Nepal? Dick, you're in Bali. I'm jealous. It's freezing here. It was 2 degrees this morning. I was standing out at the bus stop with my kids. My older one, he's 9, so he's at that stage where he doesn't want to wear a jacket and stuff like that. And I was just like, I'm absolutely frozen. And he's like, nah, I'm not putting. He refused to put it. He had a big sweater on at least, and a hat and his hoodie and stuff. But man, it's cold out now. David, welcome from Kenya. I'm assuming it's warmer there than it is here too. When I say 2 degrees, that's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. Basti man, I will be using the Discord community for feedback. I will be a bit more active since you guys, it's not a free course. I will be more active in the Discord area for this course. I was there a lot for the Conquering Responsive Layouts, but I've gotten really busy working on this course and I've been ignoring it a little bit. But yeah, I'll be active in the Discord, and I will be encouraging people to hang out in the Discord and ask questions in the Discord as we continue moving through on the course. Frank from Italy. Where are you in Italy, Frank? I've been around Italy twice now. Not everywhere though. I've done sort of the typical tourist stuff, right? Rome, Tuscany, we was in Florence, Venice, that type of stuff. Probably this is the perfect timing for me. Good. I wanted to do different times, and even when we do the live streams for once the course launches, I'm going to try and mix up the times a little bit, just to try and be able to accommodate different people in different time zones. Appren's asking about the master package of the course. I'm gonna have a bit more information on that for you guys next week. I'm sort of seeing if I can pull something off. So you might have a pleasant surprise there. Peter, you're surprised it's starting now? Sumit, the course, the material will be, the first week of material will be available on the 26th. How do you get the role on Discord? I'm gonna send an email out for that. So we'll find out. I was trying to find an automated way to do it, but it doesn't seem to be working. But I'm worried that when the full course launches, how that's going to work. So I'm still trying to see if there's an automated or semi-automated way. I think I might have found a way with a bot that you have to ping the bot and it will assign the role to you, but then it deletes all the messages so other people won't see it. But I have to test that with, if not, we're just going to have to do it through DMs. I'm just going to put my phone on Do Not Disturb so it stops dinging. I forgot to do it ahead of time. There it is. For 2 hours. There we go. Patrick, I am in Canada, yeah. 43 Fahrenheit. So that must be similar over in New Jersey than here. I'm just north of you. I'm in Montreal. Prabin, the course is bigger than I thought it would be, guys. I always end up making things longer. I forget how many videos I have. Where's my media encoder? I have 15 videos right now in queued. The first week's going to be a lot longer than I had planned for. We're definitely going to be getting into layout in the second week. The first week, the layouts are sort of going to be set up and we're going to be doing some other stuff. And then the second week is going to be a big dive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I only have 7 videos lined up to be encoded, but that's okay. What time is it? A few more minutes and we'll get started. Scotland. I have a good friend. I haven't talked to him in 20 years. My best friend from elementary school lives in Scotland. I last visited him in, geez, when was that? I have a lot of family in England and Wales, so I've been up there. But the last time I saw my friend in Scotland would have been, God, the mid-90s probably. Fabian, you're in the Scrimba Discord channel and it seems complicated to get a second group. It shouldn't be too hard. I'm going to have a video that goes over everything, that shows you the steps on how to get into the group and how to get into our specific group, since there's like a sub-channel just for us. So we'll work on that. And if anyone's ever having trouble, you can always email me. Patrick, yeah, the course is going to be on my learning portal. Habib, tu parles bien le français, Kevin? Pas très bien, non. Pour quelqu'un qui vit dans un endroit francophone, mon français, c'est pas très bien. I've lived here my whole life, but my French really, it's a little, my French improved the most when I worked at a design place for 5 or 6 years, because most of my communication was in French. But I did high school in English. Most of my jobs I've been in English. Now I taught in English. Now I'm at home by myself all day long, so I can just speak English. Prabin, the 26th of October, the first week of the course, will be live. All right, so we're just hitting 9 o'clock. So the way the course is going to work, let's switch over to my other screen. Uh-oh. Is it this one? Yes, I'll move the chat off. Oh, it's not centered though. Uh-oh. Wait, am I on the wrong one? I'm on the wrong one. Ah, there we go. That's the one I wanted. So the agenda for it is I'm going to run through on sort of a prepared lesson that I have for custom properties. As for those of you early, it'll be a little repeat, but the course is going to use custom properties, but it didn't fit into the material very well, of what I wanted to talk about. And I know some people have been using them a lot already. So I'm doing this as an extra lesson on the side. So if somebody gets to when I start using custom properties, they can break away from the main content, go over to this lesson and watch it. And then when they're done with it, they can go back into the course and not be confused by what I'm working on. And if you're already familiar with custom properties, you might not need to. But we're going to go through on the very basics into the intermediate level of custom properties. And then with the questions that I'd asked, like some people had submitted questions. Some of them are very CSS, but not about custom properties. But there was 2 questions that really tied into the lesson. So I've incorporated them into the lesson, and it sort of pushed a little further than what I was planning, but that's perfect. It's exactly why I wanted to get questions. So the first half will be that. And then I'm going to open it up. Then I'm going to go into like the regular Q&A that people submitted, but I'll also take questions in the chat along the way. So what I'm going to ask is, YouTube's not the best for me keeping track of the chat if I'm in the middle of a lesson. I'm going to be looking at it. I'm going to be looking for questions, because as I'm going through, if I say something that's confusing or you want me to repeat something or anything like that, please tell me to hit the brakes, go back over that. Let's revisit it. Can you do this? Can you do that? Like if you need deeper explanation on something, make sure you let me know. But if you have questions that are off topic, they're CSS related, maybe they're about the course, maybe they're about just other CSS topics, just hold on to them, write it down so you don't forget it. And then at the end, I'm going to open it up to a Q&A. And then if you have questions related to other stuff, we can dive into that. I think my lesson's going to be a little shorter this time than last time. I think I did about 45-minute lesson last time. So this one's maybe half an hour, but you never know. I usually go longer than I plan to. So yeah, and then I could be here up to 2 hours. So, and again, the replay, if you can't stick around the whole time, the replays will be available. I don't think I'll need 2 hours to get through everything, but if you guys keep me around with lots of questions and stuff, I can hang out for up to 2 hours. Let me just see what's happening in the chat. Jeff's, you're about to step out, but you'll be back. All right, so the chat's gone quiet. I guess you're waiting for me to get started. So we will be talking, I guess, yeah, I think everybody should be here, right? Should we wait 2 more minutes just to make sure? But I definitely would encourage you, because I always do it myself. I'll refill my coffee and then we'll get started. I always do it to myself when I'm watching something, or if I have like a question, I think of a really good question, and then I go, okay, I'm going to ask that later when it's a good time to ask questions, and then it gets to the question period, and I'm just like, oh, I forgot my amazing question. So if you do have a question, make sure you write it down if it's something you want me to answer, so you don't forget, because you don't want to be like me. And then if you ask something and I miss it at one point, just, we can come back to it later, because when I start the lesson, I'm going to be keeping an eye a bit on the chat, but I don't want to keep... Last time I think I got a little too off topic as I was doing it. I tend to pay too much attention to the chat sometimes. It's going to be partially slides, and I'm going to be jumping between slides and into like actual code as we go through it as well. And I have my notes here, so I guess we're good to go. The chat has gone completely quiet, so I guess you guys are all ready to start learning. I wouldn't actually... I'm going to start, but just... I wouldn't mind knowing from those of you who are in here. Also, if you do have a question, that's what I wanted to say. If you do have a question, but you're like shy or something, I know it happens more in the classroom than on the internet, but like ask your question, even if it seems like the most basic, simple question, because if you're wondering something, then like half the other people here are wondering the same thing. So never be shy about questions. There's no such thing as a silly question or stupid question or anything like that. So just want to make that really clear. The other thing I wanted to say was what? I had something else, but I forgot. See, I didn't write it down. I did take some notes though to get me going through this. So yeah, custom properties. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. Just in the chat really quick, if you could put have you never used custom properties before? Have you seen them, but you haven't used them? Have you never heard of them? Have you been using them, but in a basic way? Just like, are you familiar with them? That type of thing. If you could just let me know. I think we'll be a little bit all over the place in people's experience, but it'd be cool if I could have an idea of where everybody's at in their experience level. And while I wait to see that, we'll start at the very, very basics, that CSS custom properties are variables within CSS. So if anybody's been using a preprocessor, and I will be talking a little bit about preprocessor ones, just a little bit, but if anybody's used something like Sass or less, there's variables in there. You can store information. Or if you're used to JavaScript, we have variables in JavaScript. And speaking of preprocessor variables, they do have an advantage over them. So they're very similar in how they work. There is a bit of a difference, but if you are familiar with those and you haven't used custom properties yet, they're very similar, but custom properties have an advantage over them. We'll get there close to the end. Let's just see here. Tim's used them in a basic way, like defining colors, font sizes. Prabin's asking if it's variables. David's used them in a basic way, just for colors on the root. Edward's seen them but never used them. Used not often from Patrick. Habib's never heard of them. Awesome. So hopefully this blows your mind a little bit. Mark's been introduced to them from my videos. And then Mel's used them a lot. So Mel might have a thing or two to teach me about them. We'll see. Jeff, I need them very much for my color problems on pages. Some people aren't sure. They've tried to, but things haven't been going well. Awesome. Okay, so we have a bit of experience, but it looks like a lot of people... Seems like a lot of people use them for colors, and if you've been watching me, that might be where you've been getting that from, because I use them a lot for colors, obviously, in my videos, just because it's easy. And I'm actually going to look, we had a question about how I use them specifically in naming and everything, so we're going to be going through all of that. But when we create a variable, we can then reference it over and over. Okay, sorry, I was reading my slide, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense, but it's okay. We can create a variable and then reference it over, I did make a typo, whatever, and then reference it over and over again in our file, making it easier to make quick changes. So if ever you've done any JavaScript, you know you define your you define something like, okay, you know, let's say button, and then whether that's a single thing or it might be an array or a node list, but you've defined it, and then you can reference back to it wherever you need to reference back to it. You don't have to redefine it every time. So it's a little bit the same here. We're defining something, and then we can reuse it over and over again. They take a little bit more setup when you're creating your CSS file. So it's one of those things. It's a little bit. I know this is completely different, and a lot of people won't be familiar with it. But in InDesign, we have something called style sheets, where you can like save all your presets and then just apply your styles where you want. It takes a ton more setup, but in the long run, you save a lot of time. So it's the same thing here. You have to. It helps to set them up from the beginning. Sometimes you're going to realize that you're repeating yourself, and then you'll add a new custom property later on. That's completely fine. But if you set them up from the very beginning, so you have to have a bit of foresight when you're doing it, but it really pays off, even though, and it doesn't take that long to set up, really. But yeah, you do want to, it really benefits you if you set them up from the very beginning of something. The syntax of a custom property. Oh wait, let me just check the chat here. Frank uses them all the time too. So, Bastiman, I rarely have a plan from the beginning, so I use them too late and have to go back and update my code. Yes, that is, and hopefully with CSS Demystified, that is something that I want to encourage people to do as much as possible too, is to try and have a plan from the beginning. Or even if you don't have, like, it really helps to have, like, to break everything down from the very beginning. But even if you don't have a plan, there is a way you can approach your CSS that's sort of, and it's more week 2 when we get into bigger layouts where this is going to start becoming more of a thing, but I do mention it in week 1. When just like the way we can sort of scope our CSS and get more specific as we go, it can help with the planning stage a little bit, but for the custom properties, it really helps if you set them up from the beginning. Custom properties look a little weird. They're a name and a value. So we name them whatever you want to name them. And this is why it's called a custom property. We're assigning a value to it, but the property here is a property that doesn't exist in CSS. So we're creating a custom property. It's not color, it's not background, it's not whatever, it's a custom one that you've created. And we know it's custom because it has a double hyphen at the beginning. It has to have a double hyphen at the beginning. This is the rule of it. Double hyphen denotes custom property. Now, when I was coming from Sass and I was used to Sass variables are much faster to write. It's not a double hyphen, it's a single $. And this double hyphen drove me a little nuts. And you're going to see when we use it, it's even a little bit more verbose to use them. But in the long run, it's worth it. So I've gotten used to it. I barely use Sass variables anymore. So we have our name and our value. And but if you haven't used Sass and you haven't, or Less or any other preprocessor, and you see like, you know, and I keep mentioning them here, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, don't even stress about it, please. It has no impact whatsoever. I just want to make it for people that are coming with that experience. I just want to make sure that they understand the differences. So with something like Sass, we're going to see an example of this in a bit closer to the end. But you can define a variable anywhere you want. With CSS custom properties, you have to define them within a CSS rule. So you can't just put them willy-nilly wherever you want. So whenever you write it, you'll have a selector, and then inside your selector, you create your custom property name and you assign that custom property a value. Michael's mentioning that they seem okay for larger sites, but extra work for smaller sites. It's true, but I've gotten so much into the habit of always having them that for me, I like having them. But it is one of those things for sure that on a really small site, maybe you don't want to bother. Whoa, what's that doing up there? Another thing that's very important, because custom properties are regular CSS, they do take part in the cascade. And that means we can scope them to individual selectors. So if I had something like that, it's only available inside the selector. For the most part, and we're going to see exceptions to this, you can locally scope custom properties as well. And I'll look at, I've really fallen in love with locally scoped custom properties. But for the most part, almost all of your custom properties, you want them to be globally accessible. You want them so everywhere in your document can use them. And to do that, the selector that we place them inside of, so when we're making our rule, we place it in the root. And for a lot of people, custom properties is the first time that they see root. And for most people, when they're writing the CSS, the only time they'll ever use root is because they're using custom properties. You don't really see it very often. This is my only text-heavy page. The root is the root of our document, which is our HTML document. So it's our element, I should say. So if we'll go look at the code in a second, but when we go into the code, like the parent of everything is our HTML element. This is a little bit like when you're using rems. If you use a rem, it's a root m, so it's looking at the font size of your HTML element. So if the root selector is the same as our HTML, why don't we just use the HTML selector? Part of it is the reason that you see cited everywhere is that the root has a higher specificity than the HTML element. I had a bit of a discussion with Chris Coyer from CSS Tricks about this because I did an article on custom properties with them, and we sort of had a little bit of a back and forth wondering how this really became a thing. Because yes, it has higher specificity, but do you really need it? Like, it's a bit of an interesting decision that got made, but it got made very early on and was used in all the tutorials from the very, very beginning, and it just became a standard as well. So it really has become a standard. I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg, but we did also find out from someone on the Chrome team that Chrome has optimized for custom properties that are on the root if they're not changed later on. So when Chrome is looking through everything, I don't know what type of optimization they've done, but it will see if there's a custom property on the root, and it will see if it's changed anywhere else in the document. And if it isn't, it does something special with it, so it helps things render faster. So I think it's because everyone was already putting them there, would be my guess, that Chrome decided they could make that optimization. But another thing, and the reason I like putting it on the root, other than it just being a standard that everybody does now, so it's nice, it is good when we all follow the same standard. But it's nice when we can differentiate, I don't even know if I spelt it right there. Differentiate between something that's a custom property and something that's an actual style. So by putting our selector or custom properties on the root and then having our regular styles on our other selectors, it just does help make a little bit of a separation between the two, which is also useful. If you're going into a new code base and you just see the root with all the custom properties, you know where to find them right away. So that makes your life a little bit easier. A lot of talk about what they do, how they or what they look like. So how do we actually use them? And we're about to get into some real code. Because one thing is, when we do this, it's not actually doing anything yet. So actually, let's go to here, this one. So in my root, I could create a custom property and I get to choose my own name. So let's say I said color accent and I made it yellow. So this is declaring my custom property. It exists now, but it's not actually being used yet. It's just out there in the ether. It's not doing anything. So to be able to use a custom property, the syntax, as I mentioned a little earlier, is a lot. It's kind of long. So if I declare or I create my custom property like this, to use my custom property somewhere, I have to do it like this. So it's always var, and then inside of brackets, I put the name, including the double hyphen. I put a note. I put a note. I don't know about other code editors, but I have discovered if you're using VS Code, you can get around the clunkiness of this. If anybody's been watching my live stream on my Twitch live streams lately, you'll have seen it already. But I'll show it at the end because it is long to write var open bracket it's a lot of keystrokes to reference a color. But I'll show you a faster way that you can do it, at least in VS Code. Dave, I said specificity. I nailed it in this course. I don't know, when I was doing lessons on it for this course, and now it's just it works. I'm kind of proud of myself. I see a question from Apran about we can put them wherever we want in our Sass. Near the end, we'll look at a bit of a difference between the two. Actually, I wrote down the slide number of when I wanted to look at examples. I think it was here where I wanted to, because I can't actually see what slide I'm on. But let's jump into some actual code and see this in action, because I think this is a natural spot to go and do that. That's not the right one. Come on, where's my code? Uh-oh. Aha, I left it here. Okay, close that. There we go, and let me move this on over. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, I'm going to share these code pens with you. We can do it as we go. Let me make my... Okay, actually, I'll throw this... I'll put this in the chat in case anybody wants it. And I'll make sure to give the links. I lost my chat now because I was going through all the different things. Arpan. I'm saying Apran, aren't I? Arpan. I apologize for that. Dave, I can't pronounce everything properly. I have to have something that I stumble across. And I'm just going to change my viewed here to presentation mode, because then my font sizes will be bigger. There we go. That's 26. That's usually what I code in. Okay. So if we come and look at this just really basic example here, and we can come up, and again, it's usually in the root that you're going to put them. And then you come up and you create it. So here, actually, I have, like, I'm using this teal color, and I just wrote teal, I think, on that button. Let's go look. Background teal. So I'll just use that for now. Color, and the name here, I'm going to talk about why I name it the way I do, and we'll see a little bit later. And there's a question somebody asked me specifically about this, so I'll just call it color accent. Accent. And I'll just write, let's do yellow, just so it's different, and we can see it change. Or actually, no, I'm going to do teal. I'm going to do teal. And one thing, we want to look at an example of why this is so useful. So here, where it has my background teal, I'm going to switch that out for var, open and close parentheses, and put color accent, just like that. And it should switch over. There we go. I'm also going to come up and put this on my title. So let's just, I can just write it all out. So here we can say color, var, color, accent. And there we go. It's changed there too. It's a little dark on that dark background, but we'll make it work. And you know what? I guess my links would also make sense because my link is impossible to see right now. So let's come in and grab my link, and we can give that a color of var color accent. And at this stage, there's nothing too amazing about this. I've put my color in 3 places. I could have just written teal in all 3 of those places, and everything would be the same. And so I haven't really saved myself anything, and if anything, I've taken more time because I had to set up my custom property at the beginning. And then when I'm writing this, it is longer to write that. But the first nice advantage with using a custom property is because they're all 3 of these colors now, they're referencing back up to this. So because all 3 of those are going, okay, this is color accent. What is color accent? Let's go find it. And I can see that that is my teal over here. So I realized after the fact that these are a bit too dark for my text. So maybe I come in here and I change the color. And let's just make it yellow, FF0. And by changing this in one place, it's updated all 3 at the same time. And then maybe I want to make it red, I can make it all red. So right away, that is one of the coolest things. This is why I originally got into Sass in the first place, was because of variables. So now that they're native to CSS, to me that's awesome. Mel, for the default values, I'll be getting there in a little bit. So, you know, that's the basics of setting one up and actually applying it. And on the next slide, I mention, I'll jump over to the next slide, but it does take part in the cascade. I keep clicking on the wrong thing. This one, then we can go back over to here. So custom properties are, they're sort of inherited. So you can use a custom property in one of its children. So that's one of the reasons we like selecting our root, or we like declaring all our custom properties on the root. And it's because everything is a child of my root, or of my HTML element. So by declaring them there, it means any element on my page can use them. We can't use a custom property if it's defined in one place somewhere else. And that's kind of awkward to say. I think it's easier to see. So these slides will be available for download, which is why I'm doing this and going in the code. But here, if on my root I made a color accent, I can use it wherever I want. In my H1, if I made a color accent, I can't use that over on my button. So to take a look at that in the code, let's just say, let's take this off. I'm just going to comment it out for a second. And it all disappears. And then we come over, and this isn't working. So actually, one thing that this is, I think I mentioned this later in the slides, or I do, and we'll come back to it. But one thing that is important to know about custom properties is if it sees a custom property and it doesn't, this is never defined anywhere, then it just pretends it's not there. And this is one of the beautiful things about CSS that people from other programming languages sometimes hate. It's the same with HTML. Or HTML sort of, but with CSS, if something doesn't work, it just skips that line of CSS. So this would be the same as me saying color and then here putting like, I don't know, 42. Well, it doesn't know what color 42 is, so the browser just ignores that line of code and it keeps rendering everything else. And this is one of the reasons we can have progressive enhancements, because we can use CSS that only works in modern browsers, but it won't break the experience in old browsers. So if you wanted to use like scroll behavior smooth, it's working in some browsers but not other browsers, it's not the end of the world, and you didn't break the experience for everybody. So something like this is the same thing as me saying var color accent, and it can't find a color accent, so it just ignores it and keeps going. It's just inheriting the white color from where I set it here. So it's inheriting that color from the body. So that isn't really important to know. What I could do here is I could define the custom property here if I wanted to. So this would be a locally scoped custom property. So I could say color accent here is green. My title will change to green. What I could also do is, let's turn this off for a second and go to the HTML. Here I could put a span around the word here. And I could come in on my title span, and I could say that the color is my var color accent. And the span is able to use this custom property here because it's part of my H1. And this custom property is being defined inside my H1. But you can see it's not working on my link and it's not working on my button because we've scoped it to the title, so it can't escape out of there. And that's something that's really important to know. So we have the locally scoped ones and we have ones that are externally scoped. So that is really important to understand. So I'll just turn that off for a second and turn this one back on. We're going to come back to this as we go through, because custom properties, as useful as it is to be able to go and switch colors of everything in one shot, or switch all your fonts in one shot across everything, or font sizes, or whatever it is, that's already an amazing superpower. But it gets better as we go through on this. Oh, that's a good question. Jeff saying this is what he needed. It's easy to experiment with colors. Yes, that is one of my favorite things about it. Patrick, what if you define root in one CSS file? Will it cascade into other linked files? I would imagine. I've never tried that. I'm guessing it would. I don't see why it wouldn't. Maybe we could do a little test with that at the end. Let me write it down because I want to open VS Code later. So we'll try it out. But I would imagine it would work. Actually 100% it should work. Because when we define it in the root, it's getting applied to my HTML element. We'll test it, but I'm 100% sure it would work. Yeah. Our pan, yeah. So yeah, that's what's happening here with my, well, when I did it on my span, it's cascading into my span, so I can use the custom property here if I only defined it on my H1. I don't use that type of behavior very often but actually that's not true. I sort of take advantage of it. Okay, a few of you guys are chatting about things I'm about to teach you. You're ahead of the game, which is awesome. So let's go back to my slides. Yeah, okay. And this is, I think, what was just mentioned in the chat. Because custom properties do take part in the cascade, you can overwrite them in a similar way. So we're going back and forth here a lot. I wish I had a better setup to switch between my two, like this, because then I have to go to, it's not that bad, I guess. So where this is cool is here we have my color accent. And then here I'm saying that my title is using my color accent. So, you know, before I even do it, what's going to happen here, and I can take my span off for the moment. If I turn this comment off, is my title going to stay pink, or is my title going to change to green? What do you think is going to happen? I'll see if anything comes up in the chat. Will I wait to see if anybody says anything? Jeff is asking if there's any performance penalty. Custom properties have been pretty heavily optimized, so you should be fine. And I know there is one issue, which is backroads compatibility. It doesn't work in Internet Explorer. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll put that down too. There is a way around that. Yeah, I see a lot of greens coming in. So if we turn that on, my title changes to green. And if you're wondering, if you're not too sure what happened, this is exactly the same thing here as me saying that here my color is EF, so my color is white. And then I come in on my paragraph text and I say that my paragraph text should be color pink. So if we do that and we go and look in our code, we can see that the original color was EF, but it got redefined here. It's being crossed off because this is inherited from the body. And then I've selected my paragraph specifically and redefined the color to pink. So it's no longer using its inherited color. It's now using the one I've applied specifically to that style. So if we come in, the custom properties don't show us here as well, because we see it actually. I didn't think we would here. So yeah, we can see here, inherited from the HTML is my color accent, and that's being crossed off because I've gone and redefined color accent up here and set it to green. So that means my color is using this one. And this is also one thing I love about the dev tools, is they actually show you the colors here when you're using custom properties. It is one of the downsides in the code editors because they don't do that. So when I'm using VS Code, it doesn't show you the little color blocks, which sort of sucks. But it's nice that you can actually see it in your dev tools and see what all the colors are, even though you're using custom properties. It makes debugging so much easier. Let's get rid of my pink because we're making things really ugly. And we'll turn this green off for a second. Because there is another thing with custom properties that, or just as another quick example, you could, you could define something in your root, redefine it on a div, redefine it on a selector, get more specific each time, and redefine it each time. There's no problem with doing that. And we're sort of going to do something like that. But we have to be really careful with it. Really careful, because it doesn't always behave the way you'd expect it to behave. And this is my example. And this is something that I ran into, and it drove me absolutely nuts. And we're going to set this up, but I'm just going to let you know this doesn't work. And maybe I'll wait to see if anybody can figure out in the chat. Or actually, while I wait for that. So I'm going to say, I set my root font size to 1.25 rem. I set my body's font size to font size. And then I've redefined my font size on my call to action. In the call to action, the font size will still be this one up here. I wish this wasn't the case, but it is how it works. And there's a very good reason this is why it works. And once you understand it, you're fine. But maybe think about that for a second. I'm going to set this up in CodePen, and then we'll see in the chat if anyone knows why this doesn't work. And we'll explore it as we go through. So let's set up a font size up here. Font size 400 is I'll put 25 rem, or no, we'll do 125 rem. My body will get my var font size 400. And then let's come in on my button. I don't want to make a new element. We'll come into my button and we'll redefine the font size here. So we'll say that font size 400 should be 3 rem, so it should be gigantic. We got one little change, but the font size didn't change. Oh no, we didn't get a change. Okay, it's because I broke my inline block. I was like, oh, why did that happen? So this is doing nothing right now. Let's see. Oh, Mel, that's a really good point. Mel's saying that you can also override a custom property using inline styles. This is super like for me, that's sort of how it can link into JavaScript in a cool way too, to do some fun stuff there. John, there's a VS Code extension that will show you the color blocks. I'm gonna have to find that. That's good to know. Is something out of frame? Oh no, it's out of frame. I forgot to change my thing here. There we go. So just to show you really fast, sorry about that. I set up my font size here in the root, and then I used it on my body. So my font size on my body is linked to here. So if I change this really fast, we can see everything will get bigger. And if we go back, it goes back to that size. So everything is growing or shrinking because that's my body's font size. And then over here on my button, I've changed my font size, but nothing is, my buttons haven't changed in font size. So you're right, I'm being more specific here. I'm selecting my button specifically. Why wouldn't this be changing anything? I see a few comments still coming in about my screen, but I'm guessing it's okay now. I can see the preview and it looks okay. Peter's got the right answer. Why is that, Peter? Why does that fix it? I'm going to pull up my dev tools while I see if... so if we go into my button right here, we can see that, and this is actually kind of frustrating part of it, because we can see in my root that the font size is 400. We can see that the font size here is using font size 400, and then we get to here and we see, well, the font size actually, it's being crossed off, and it is set to 3 rem. Frank, if there is one, I would like to know. Oh, Alessander, it's I'm on a regular link, even though it's called a button. So that's a very good guess, actually, but it's not that. Yeah, so I see a few people coming in with the class. Maybe font size can break the layout. Okay, so I see a few. Peter got it right, and then Fabian's come in with the right idea as well. So what's happening is the font size of my button right now is where this is where like part of the cascade and inheritance comes in. Is if we look here, I've never declared a font size on my button. My font size is being inherited from my body. And so if we actually, let's go look and see if it tells us in computed. Font size is 18. Why is it 18? Okay, perfect. It is showing us why. So if I go to computed and I click on my font size, it's 18 pixels. And it's because it's inheriting the font size from my body. And it's not really paying attention at this state. Well, it's looking at this variable, but the body can't look back up into the button. The body can only look at its own scope. So the body here, when we're in the body, the font size it sees is 1.125. So if other things are inheriting that font size, that means that they're inheriting this font size. They're not inheriting something that you might have redefined later on. So as a few people said, to fix this, you'd have to come in and say that the font size is font size 400. Whoops. Var font size 400. And now they're too big, so they don't fit next to one another because I went really big on that. But now I can use this redefined one. And this is one of, this took me a while, or not a while. I got a little frustrated with it because it does take away one of the cool things that I thought you could do with custom properties. Because it's kind of annoying if you have to both redefine it and then call it again to use it. But it does make sense why it's happening. And again, it's because if I don't set a font size here, it's not looking at this one. It's going, my font size is being inherited from my body. My body, which is the 400, is looking at this. My body can't look inside the scope of the button. It's only looking at its own scope. And we're inheriting that font size. So if we are redefining things, you do have to be a little bit careful in how you use them. So this would be the same as redefining a color, for example. So if I did color base, and I set my color base to let's do yellow, just so it really stands out. And then on my body, I said that my color is my var color base. That changes over. If I go on my link now, and I say that this is, let's just take this off for a sec. I can't redefine, like if I say color base is red, you can see it doesn't actually change. It's not, all right, well, this doesn't make sense on a link. But anyway, because that's not, okay, let's do it on my title then. If I take my color off, color base, it's not getting redefined because it's looking at where it was inherited from. It's not looking at this one here because I never actually declared my color property. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. There is a way that you can use, okay. So I hope this doesn't confuse anybody, but I know it's something that I've run into roadblocks with. So it's this weird like scoping thing of how custom properties work and how you can redefine them. And for me, this gave me a little bit of a roadblock when I reached this stage of using custom properties. But then I found the solution to get around it as well and to really unlock, in my opinion, the power of custom properties. Yep, Mel came up with one very good answer, which is when you could select everything. So this is where usually we define a lot of things on our body. And what we're doing when we define things on the body is we're relying on inheritance. So we're relying on the color to be inherited by the children. We're relying on the font size to be inherited by the children, the line height, all of those things. One way around this, and I pushed this too far on some projects I've done, but you could say that instead of selecting my body and relying on inheritance, what you could do to get around all of this is you could say that my color on everything is my var color base. And see how these just switched all of a sudden? So this is definitely one way around it. The reason that I don't use this too often is because I wanted to use it for backgrounds as well. And if you use it for backgrounds, it's a big way. You could get into trouble using it with backgrounds, even though there's a sort of a way around it. I think I'm going to get into it in the course, actually, a way around it for backgrounds. But it's still, it's iffy. If you have a gradient, everything goes out the window. But yeah, here, if I define it here, what it's saying, because what's happening now is instead of relying on inheritance, I've selected everything and said their color has to use this. So there's no more inheritance coming in. Inheritance is now gone. Every property is getting their color base set to it. So now I could actually come through and change the color of my title by changing this, and I don't have to define my color in there. So that is definitely an option and something you could 100% use in your projects. And some people get scared of the universal selector for performance issues. Don't, please. CSS browsers are so good at rendering CSS these days. You can go look up performance tests of CSS from very smart people that have done these things. And you can get into some really crazy wild selectors, and the browsers render it. They're fast. So just like a universal selector like this, there's no performance hit, or if there is, like it's a millisecond maybe. So you really, it's performance of CSS these days runs into issues when you're doing transforms and animations on stuff that you shouldn't be. So, but just your selectors and everything, for the most part, unless you're going absolutely crazy with what you're coming up with some really wild, crazy selectors, you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, this is just in the slides. If we do that, it doesn't work. So one of the ways to fix it is you redefine it and use it, and call it or declare it again here. So that's what we just looked at. And this is something that we just mentioned. If you use a custom property that was never defined, the browser simply ignores it the same way it ignores an invalid property. So we saw that, and I changed it to like 46, and it was the same thing. And that might seem useless, right? Like, why? Well, it's not useless in the sense like your CSS doesn't break, so that's a good thing. But like, why would you be calling custom properties that you're not using, or that you never declare it in your root, for example? But if you provide a fallback, this is insanely powerful. And this is where you can really unlock a lot of power of custom properties. And by an example of this, if you do why did I put this one up here? This is what I wanted to look at, is down here, where you can define some custom properties like this. Oh, I know why. I want to show you here, like my button FG and my button BG, they're never defined up here. They don't exist. So I've called two custom properties that don't exist. But as part of the syntax of a custom property, you can put a comma and put a fallback value. So it's going to try and put button foreground, but if it doesn't find that, it's going to default to FFF for my color. And it's going to look for a button background, but if it can't find it, it's going to use the 333 here as the fallback. Oops, we'll go back one step. So let's see that in action, because this, actually, I think we can come on to this one for this. This is where things, I'll share this one as well. This is where things get really, really interesting. So I've set up a whole bunch of custom properties here just to have colors, so I don't have to create them on the fly. These are from the CSS Demystified site. And so let's just go look. And the way I've set this up, I have content 1, content 2, content 3. And we're just going to start with the first one here. And you can see I have my button, and then a button default, and a button accent. But instead of saying background white, color black, that's these ones here. And then what I could do is say that my button, so there's no actual colors being defined here. And even this could do away with the need for this default and accent. Let's do it here, actually. I do want to do it here, actually. So here what I could say is that my color should be var btn foreground. Foreground just means like in front, so I often use foreground for text colors and then bg for my background colors. So button foreground. And if it cannot find my property of button foreground, I can say that it should be red, just so we can see that it's working. And let's turn this and this off. Here we go. So you can see that the color has switched to red because it could not find a button foreground. And then I could say that my background should be var button background. And if it can't find the button background, I want it to be let's just say pink, so it's not too offensive on our eyes. And we get a button that can come in. And this is where it can be really, really cool, because this is sort of setting up a default. So we have this, a default value. So if you're just quickly writing code, your button isn't broken. You have something that's coming in and it's pretty much working. And then what we can do is we can redefine these, or not redefine, we can define them now inside these different contexts. So I can come on my button default and I can say that my btn foreground is FFF, and my btn BG is, oh wait, this should be FFF. And here this would be 333. And you can see it's overwritten what I had here, because it's not referring back to the fallback anymore. It's now getting to my button default where I have set up an actual value. And then I could use that over here as well. So we could say that my btn fg is foreground white, so FFF, and my btn bg is teal. They'll look exactly the same. Let's just change this to red so we can see that it worked. There you go. And back to teal. And as Mel has just pointed, Mel, you've used custom properties a lot, haven't you? One thing that's really nice to do with the defaults, let's add a third button that doesn't have anything on it. We'll copy you and paste you. So with this third button here, oops, I did one thing wrong. I don't want to have an accent. Let's just put like a button like this, so there's no second class on there. There we go. Instead of using red or pink, what's really, really common to do, and I've actually seen a case for putting like really wild, stupid colors on something as a way to let people know, like, it just looks so bad that people know they forgot, like they have another step they have to do. So if you're part of like a team, you could set like this like yellow and I don't know, something that doesn't work. So as soon as the designer does it or the developer does it, they see this really nasty color come up that has nothing to do with their color scheme, and they go, oh yeah, I need to do something that's going to set up the colors on it. I'm not a big, I like the idea of it, but I just think it could lead to problems, and we might as well set a default that works for everybody. But where instead of red, you could come in here with a var and do color. What colors do I have? We'll say accent 400. Accent 400. Or actually, I should have done that as my background. Okay, we'll copy that for my background. And then this one could be, we'll just do white, I guess. Or even, I must have a variable in here. Color neutral 100, I'm guessing, is my white. There we go. So you can have custom properties be fallbacks for custom properties. And you could technically chain this like 10 deep if you wanted to. I think at one point it gets confusing though. So like, you could have this one not be defined and have that default to something else, which is another custom property, and so on and so forth. But obviously at one point, like you're getting more complicated than you would ever want to for anything. But this, while I think is a really cool first step that you can do, another thing that's really neat with this, what was my third one? I had a third thing that I wanted to do with this one, but I don't remember what it was. Oh, it's just talking about my naming. Okay. I've gone longer on this than I thought I would. But that's okay. What we can do now also is, let's say I go to my content 2. So here I could say content 2. So I'm just going to do a background on this of my var color neutral 100, which is my white color. And then a color on here, which is my var color neutral 500, maybe? Okay, there we go. So I've changed those colors, which is fun and it works well. But another thing I could do is I could actually, we could rely on the cascade and rely on inheritance when we're using our custom properties, as we've seen, and play with numbers and things a little bit more. And this depends on how you've set up your defaults and stuff, but I just want to show it as a possibility. I thought I saw a chat, but nope. So, I mean, here I'm just using them in the basic way. And actually, let's go to my content. Sorry, I messed this up a little bit. What I wanted to do is on my content, we could set up custom properties here that have fallbacks. So I could say that my background is var, I'm just going to, or we'll do content bg, and transparent as the default. So normally it's transparent, but if I wanted to apply a background to it, I can. And then my color is going to be var color content foreground. And that would default to my variable of color neutral 100, sorry. And everything should look exactly the same. Nothing's going to change at this point. But what that means is on my .content1, we could change it now. So I could say that my content bg is, I'll just do, or whatever, red, and my content foreground is black. So you could come through and do things like that, which could be useful. And then this isn't as super useful maybe, but it is one way that you could definitely work. Another option with this is I could just come in with, whoops, or even just to show you, like one thing I like about this, sorry, I'm getting a bit off track. I'm trying to go too fast. One thing I like about this is color and background, maybe it's not as obvious as other things, but just by redefining custom properties, I do find that there's a bit of power in this and a bit of fun things that you could do with it. Actually, here, then let's just say that I don't like the red background. It's not going to work. Let's do light blue. And button BG is black. Oh no, sorry, that's not going to work. Because of the, again, this is the same thing that we ran into before, because it's looking at these styles here. Did I thought I'd set it all up properly. Undo that. Didn't I come? Oh, sorry, yeah, these are custom properties. Sorry, it is looking at those. But one thing, okay, another thing we could do, we could have it based on the defaults that are coming through. So I could say that it's going to my button foreground. We could also come in and like have it reference other things as well along the way. So this is where it does get a little bit more advanced, but you could have the background, like you could inverse buttons at the same time. So let's say I did my button, what's this one, accent. I'm just going to call this background and foreground, BG and FG. Because what I could do is my button default is going to be var BG foreground becomes background, but we can have a fallback, and var foreground. This should work. Or am I going to screw it up now? And then this is just my BG and my FG. There we go. And then so you can see like the button is the foreground, so the color is using the background color of my content 1 now. So it's sort of like we're chaining through in a different sort of way here. So I'm saying my default button state should be using the background color of the parent, and the background color should be the text color. So we're just inverting the colors that I'm using over here. And then that means that if I came in on my content 2 and I did the BG is, we'll do red just so it really stands out, and my foreground is white, this button is different from this button because they're using their parents' colors to define themselves. And this obviously, this gets a little bit more complicated. And if you're looking at this going like, whoa, what's happening? I would really encourage you to play around with it. It's something that I'm going to be looking at more in the course. Because this is where you can get into some really powerful things where like you're switching colors through an entire system just by like a whole setup of stuff, just by changing a couple of custom properties. So it can be really, really powerful. Oh, I like that idea too, Mel. So here I'm doing like, these are bad examples because I'm doing content 1, content 2. But let's say and that's a little bit more of what I actually did in the course. In the course, I have like our default, and then I have a BG light and a BG dark and a BG accent. And those are playing around with the custom properties to change what they're set to. But yeah, instead of doing like a content 3, you could have like a default content and then a invert, let's say, or a content invert, or however you want to call it, or a BG invert. So you could have your defaults that are coming, where is it? You could sort of set this up to be like that, and then you could come in on your BG invert and then use that to switch the properties around. So we could copy this, not that one. Or yeah, we could even do that. We could copy this and then just switch these around. So this becomes foreground and this becomes background. And I forget which one did I put that on. Oh, it's working. It's because my body's background color. Let's turn off that. Body. Is it not working? The color's working. Anyway, that's... Oh, it's because I have the transparent that's coming on. Yeah, it's the background's transparent. But you could use that to invert colors and stuff like that as well. Or actually, why am I doing that? Your BG invert, first of all. I forgot the dot, so it wasn't working. And here I could just say that I'm being silly. I just need to come in and change the properties. So I could say that my BG and then define a color, and then I could come in with my FG foreground and define a color and have them inverted compared to what the default is. So yeah, that would work. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep on that. If you're a little bit confused by it, but you're comfortable early on, I would encourage you to at least start using the custom properties a bit, and then build your way up into this area that I got to. Because it definitely, at one point, you start getting into this weird inception of like, where is it calling? Where is this coming from? And you sort of have to build the links. You can see even here, I was getting a little bit mixed up with it. I should have practiced this example specifically maybe a little bit more, but you can build really powerful systems that update really, really quickly, and it is something that I'm going to get to a lot more in the course. So if you just want to start experimenting with the early stages of custom properties, if that's where you're at, don't worry about diving this deep in yet. Start with the basics of them, just start using them, maybe look at how you can overwrite them, or start getting used to the power of them is what I would recommend. One question that continues off what I wanted to be talking about was someone had put in a question saying they were wondering what the color system I use. They noticed from my live streams that my custom properties for colors follow color primary 400 naming convention. And I was wondering what the 400 number part represents. I noticed that the higher the number, the darker the color is. Is there a method behind this? Awesome question. And so I'll show you what I did. And it was a little bit of a mess because I won't lie. I built... Actually, I just realized I keep forgetting to switch scenes, guys. I'm so sorry. Let's just hear it so you can actually see the whole question. Whoops. So you can actually see the whole question properly. I'm sorry. I read it out to you, so it's not so bad. But yeah, my idea is, I'll let this catch up, the stream catch up. But what my idea here is similar to the font weight defaults that we have to work with. So when we're working with font weights, we have a 400, which is our base. That's the regular. And then you get to skinnier font weights or lighter font weights by going up in the numbers. And then you get to darker font weights by going into bigger numbers. So bold is always 700, light is always 300, thin is 200, all of those. So because we have a numbering convention already that goes from light to dark or thin to heavy, however you want to see it, this is the same type of idea. So if we jump back into my other screen, if I go to CSS Demystified, and I think some people have been playing around in here. Now, the code in here is not bad, but there's messy parts of it because I sort of tacked some stuff on as I was going. So my color scheme actually grew as I was working on things. But you can see here, I used a lot of custom properties. And you'll see in my, I do it for my font weights, but the font weights are really similar because the font, I'll make this bigger. When I'm doing my font weights, I'm using like the regular font weight. 300 is 300, 4 is 4, 7 is 7. I used to say font weight normal, and then because sometimes like my normal font weight would be 300. So for me, I thought it made more sense. So I had like a font weight normal, font weight bold, font weight black. But because I started using numbering conventions elsewhere, and I don't remember where I first saw this. I wasn't the one who came up with this, but I saw other people using it, and it made so much sense to me that I've started using it too. And you can see like, so for my font sizes, let's just, my font size is up here where they won't be crossed out. So I use a font scale. So 400 is like my base font size. This is the one I'm using on my body. And then I have the smaller sizes and the bigger sizes I can easily access. But you'll see in my color scheme here got broken a little bit because again, I was tacking things on and I made some last minute changes to the design. So my primary actually got changed to white at one point, or I ended up leaving it there because it became white. but that's maybe not a primary color. So my and you'll see my numbering is a little bit inconsistent because even my secondary was a different color and it eventually became these dark colors. So my secondary 400 was this one. And then I sort of needed lighter versions of it, so I added those, and then I needed a darker version. But like usually on my neutral color, like usually I would call this neutrals because they're more neutrals than secondary. And like a mid gray would be by 400, and then I'd get to white by 100, and I'd get to close to black by the time I get to 900, for example. This scale's working a little bit better. And I don't have the full like 100 to 900, and you could go beyond that too in either direction. I don't have the full one, I never do, but I always start at the 400 and then I go lighter and darker from there based on what I need. One thing you will notice is my font sizes. I go up to 900 and then I have an XL just because it's like, I could do 1000, but I want it to be really obvious that it's like extra large. Font family, accent, font family, primary. So for font families, I don't think a numbering system really works, so I don't use it there. And for some other stuff too. But for colors and for font weights and for font sizes, I find it such an easy system to work with. You don't have to remember these weird numbers, you just have to remember the next number in the scale. Michael, nice session. I can see the advantage even for smaller sites. Great, that's good. And I do think that I think it was you, Michael, who mentioned early on. I do think just setting up like a basic scale like this and a few colors right away, like it's a little bit of setup, but then it works even on small sites, I think. Mel's mentioning if you use HSL colors, you can automate the darkness with custom properties in Calc. You could. I had very specific colors I was using. It was based on a design that I kept changing. So I was just using the hex, but you could, yeah, you could do a calc on the lightness level, I guess, or the saturation, depending on what type of colors you want. Keith, that's okay that you're late, no problem. You can always watch the rest later. So yeah, that's where my naming convention or the type of naming I use. I would recommend, I've evolved how I've been doing it. It comes back even from when I was using Sass variables, but I've changed over time. Here's another example. I have a screenshot in here too. This is all the same thing. This was just the screenshot of what we were just looking at. I forgot I had that. And I'm on the wrong one again. There we go. So yeah, this is just, you can see I set up my font accent, my font family primary, and you will notice obviously I'm starting every color with CLR. I'm starting all my font families with FF, all my font weights with FW, font sizes with FS. And there's a reason for this. And what's the next slide? Okay. I'll show you the reason that I do that. First of all, it makes it easy for me because I know if I want a color, it's always CLR. If I want a font weight, it's always FW. So part of it is just reducing cognitive load for me. That's always nice. The less I have to think, the better. But the other reason I do it is because, and this doesn't work if you're, like here, actually, this is a good example of where it doesn't work, even though it sounds like there might be an extension for it. Let's go and look at my chat bubble. No, I don't have the colors set up for my chat bubbles. So just really here, you can see I've set up like all my custom property, or these are, I'm using custom properties. But let's say I wanted to, if I said background, oh, it's coming up. If you've already used the color somewhere, VS Code might come up with it if you do the double hyphen. So you can see I'm seeing a few here because they're already set up in this file. But it's not showing me all of my custom properties that I have available to me because I've made them all available in my root. So here's all the custom properties that were set up. But the advantage is, let's open up my other one. This one, style stage, save. So the advantage here, if you're just running on regular CSS, or there may be extensions that can help us with this, is here at the top, I've defined all my custom properties. So I don't have as many as on other sites, but you can see all my colors that I've set up here in my root. And what I love about this is, I'll do it right here at the top so we can stick close to them. If I come on something and I do my selector, and then I come into, so I do color, and I know I want a color, I can just do double hyphen CLR, and I just get a list of all my colors, and I can actually see the colors. This is so handy. So I go, okay, I need the, I don't have to think about the name of it. I can just see it. I can click on it, or I can see it's A. So I do that, and then I can push enter. Same thing if I need font sizes. So font size is, and again, you don't need the var. I'm still so used to doing it and getting it. But because of the way VS Code's working, double hyphen, font size, and then I only have my base, so it's not the best example. Font weight do I have? So there, I get my 2 font weights. And when I go on it, it's showing me what it is. So if you're not sure, like, it's actually showing me what that is. So if I go to font size, it's font size base, which is 1 rem. So like this autocomplete feature that VS Code has, and I'm assuming other editors must have it as well, is just super handy and so useful, because you don't have to go through the whole thing of writing var, and then it shows you your whole list of variables. So when you're all the way down on a big file, it's super useful. And if I find out what the extension is, when I send out the link for this replay, I'll send out the link to the extension that might help if you have multiple files to reference the other ones. We'll see if we can do that, because that would be super, super useful. Colorize. Is it Colorize? Colorize can do that? Cool. I remember the Colorize extension, but so we'll look at that. But I'll include a link to it I'll test it out just to make sure, but I believe you, John. David, if we learn this well, is it worthwhile learning SCSS? I think it is still. I still love Sass. You can do a lot of other things with Sass. They did take that away, and actually they're looking at adding a lot of features to CSS that are built into Sass and less, which I'm a little bit split on. I guess, I don't like the idea of raising the complexity of vanilla CSS too much if it can do the job, but at the same time, like, it's a hard thing to balance, I guess. So maybe at one point, if they bring in mix-ins and they bring in nesting the same way that it works right now, it would much reduce the need for it. I have seen the syntax, though. I wasn't a big fan of their syntax that they're proposing, but we'll see what happens with that. But just with mix-ins, loops, other things. Now Sass and partials too. I'm a big, like, if you see here, like, this file that I'm working on is 900 lines long. If I look at my CSS Demystified website, which again, the code is a little messy on it, but I have tons of files. Like, none of my files are very long. Any file that I open is relatively short. Like, I have 4 lines of code in that one. So everything is very specific, but it does mean I have lots of files. I like this because I find it easier to stay organized, but obviously it depends on what you're doing. It took me a little while to get used to this idea, but the partials I really like a lot. And you could do that with you don't need Sass to do that. You could do that with, like, in your build, you could have 100 CSS files that all get merged into one when it goes to production. So it's not like you need Sass to do something like that. Nesting is really awesome. They're looking at bringing nesting to CSS. But Sass, the bigger the project, like, yeah, the bigger the project, the more I find Sass becomes useful. On small projects, a lot of, like, things like mix-ins can be a little bit of overkill. I think my favorite thing is nesting media queries is so nice. Let's see what my next slide is. We had another question. I want to change to here. So another question that was very related, actually, and this is where it gets into CSS. This compares to Sass. So I struggle with keeping font sizes from getting too small or too large inside a container. They have my Scrimba course, and I go into viewport widths and when to use them, or M and Rem, but it just isn't intuitive to me. Is there a newer way? So clamp is a good thing that I'm not going to dive into too much now. I don't. If the person asking this is live, you can jump into the chat and let me know. I didn't write any. They're anonymous, these, so I don't know who asked them. Some people put their names, but I didn't include it. But if you don't know about clamp could be really, really useful, and I would look into that. I think I talked about it on the last live stream. And I have YouTube stuff, so I won't dive into it right now unless everybody in the chat starts asking me to. Part of it is design, just making sure your fonts aren't too big or too small. But what I love, and I put it at this part of the question and answer because for me it's still relevant to custom properties. And so I'm going to pull up my other, I have 1/3 example. right here, and I'll put this one in the chat as well. So if you guys want to follow along. Presentation mode. What we can do is when we have font sizes, or when we have custom properties, we can redefine them inside media queries. And this is something you cannot do. Actually, I think I have a slide for this. Did I? I did. See, custom properties have superpowers over preprocessors. And that one is that you can redefine a custom property inside a media query. And this to me is so cool. So just if you're not used to Sass or CSS or any of them, in Sass, this is a variable, which is the same as a custom property. One difference with them is you can see it, there was the question really early on when I said you can define them anywhere you want. You don't have to define a variable inside of a selector like you do a custom property. So when I define this font size 300, it becomes available everywhere. And so if I go and look here, I'm now using font size 300. So it's just, I just put $ font size 300 to use that Sass variable. So if I come up here and I change it, everything should get bigger. Or not. There we go. Okay, good. I was like, oh no, I did something wrong. It's always the panic when you're doing a live stream of like, what if I just completely got this wrong? So this is defining it. And I don't have, one of the nice things in a way about Sass variables is you don't have to define them anywhere. You just have them floating. So you just make a file that just has them all listed out. There's no selector or anything like that. And the cool thing with that, in a way, it means they're not, when you write Sass, it can't stay as Sass. It has to take that file and turn it into CSS, which the browser understands. The browser doesn't know what this is. So what happens is it compiles the Sass into CSS. And that means if I come and look at my font size, it's just taking that number and it's copying and pasting it wherever I put it pretty much. So it's not using that variable anymore. It's just taken that number and placed it somewhere. Whereas a custom property stays a custom property. It's accessible by the browser. And actually, just to really highlight how much it is, and this is where you could go into JavaScript and like manipulate colors. But if I go on this black color, like I can go in here and I can change it live in the dev tools and make it any color I want. And you could do this with JavaScript. You could have animations that change a custom property. You can do all sorts of interesting things with this. So custom properties, like the browser has access to them, they can change them, they can manipulate them. Whereas Sass variables or less variables or whatever custom property you're using, they can't be redefined because they're being compiled into CSS, then they're locked. So once that CSS becomes CSS, it's not a variable anymore. It's a locked thing. And so while it's cool to define it wherever we want, and while this syntax is much shorter than having the double and then to do the var thing, the disadvantage here is I can't redefine them. I can't redefine this in a media query. So if I put print here just so it wouldn't give me an error. But if I switch this to a min width of 600 pixels, just so we can be pretty small. Well, 600 is really small. Maybe we'll do 800. If I do it at 800 pixels, which is right around here, and I say that my font size 300 should actually now be 2 rem, you'll see it's not doing anything. Like it doesn't change when I'm switching my screen size. This doesn't work. It's not possible with Sass. And what this usually would mean is you'd actually end up with these maps of variables. So you could have a full map of variables for your regular font sizes, and then a whole new map of variables for the next font size up. And you could come up with mix-ins that would sort it all out with your media queries. Or it would even be like you'd define all your font sizes and then you'd and then apply them all. So you'd set it all up and then apply them all. And then in a media query, you'd redefine your font size on everything. So you'd have to redeclare it. So your body's redeclared, everything had to be redeclared to the different set of variables. Whereas what we can do with custom properties is we can actually redefine it. So if I come here in my body and I switch this to var font size 300, now you can see that my font size actually switches. And let's make it more obvious. Let's make this 1.5 so it gets really big. So at small screens it's there, and at big screens it's here. So I can redefine a custom property inside a media query. So I've gotten really, really partial, and I'd use this on CSS Demystified site. If I can pull up VS Code again. I use this because you can see I set up all my styles, and then I took all my font sizes and I redefined them at inside this media query. So some things stayed the same, so I didn't actually have to redefine them. I just copied pasted and then was changing some of them. So like this one, actually 300 got smaller. That's interesting. And 400 got smaller. And 5. Why'd they all get smaller except for the big ones? What was I doing? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh wait, 700's bigger. 600's smaller. I don't think I used all of them either, so that might be part of the reason why. I told you this was a bit of a mess. But anyway, you can redefine them inside a media query, which is insanely useful. Super, super useful to be able to do, at least for font sizes. So I find like instead of worrying about like the font stretching or shrinking and like trying to come up with weird clamps or trying to use viewport units with a calc and being really careful with it and then things still getting out of control, just setting some, making a media query, and then redefining them with a new scale, I think is super, super useful and super, super handy. There's easier ways too. I think we looked at it in a previous one, or if not, I do it in the course where we can just change the font size on the HTML and let things, let that impact everything because we use rems for font sizes. But something like this to me is extremely powerful. Hi there, Robert. Was that your question? Jeff, if you missed the first live I did, it's not. But the link, I emailed out the link. I'll email when I send the recording of this one. I'll send the link for the other one as well. And then so you have both of them. And then once the course launches, it's going to be part of. You'll be able to access it in the course portal as well. These are only for course people. I'm not making these public. But yeah, I find like this is to me a huge superpower, being able to redefine custom properties inside of media queries. I find it so, so useful. If anyone has any questions now, we're going to break into the Q&A section. So I do have some other questions that were a bit more off topic, so I'm going to jump into those, but I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So if anybody has any questions whatsoever, it can be about anything. These are the questions you've been writing down. By all means, throw them in the chat and we're going to get to them. Before that, though, I'll check out this question that came in. It's always been, I think I fixed a little bit of the grammar in some of them, and I might have deleted a word here. I think it's always been hard or difficult figuring out how selectors map to actual usage in the HTML after you create them and then start applying them. At the same time, the interaction between two selectors and unintended side effects that require you to debug the design to see how class, selectors, etc. have now been combined. This is a big part of CSS Demystified. A big part of the first week is going through and making sure you're understanding the cascade inheritance. And when I say the cascade, it's not just like this, you put this first, this second, and this one wins. It's about going into importance. And so there's the order, what is it? Order of appearance, specificity. I'm forgetting the other one, even though I just did the lessons for it. And the importance too, the breakdown of importance. Like we have the user agents importance, we have author styles, and we also have user styles, and where all of that plays into it. So like this question, hopefully the first week is all about figuring out. I'd also dive into class naming to try and get around problems and to try and come up with easier ways to maintain your code. And I'm also diving into the dev tools a little bit to explore how we can find unintended consequences and how we can see exactly what's happening. So I just actually yesterday added a lesson or 2 lessons and I did a really simple one, but it's a lot about this, of seeing how things are applied and understanding where things are coming from. So I just added that to the first week yesterday. I need to edit that one still. But yeah, so the first week I think will answer a lot of those questions. I keep losing my chat window. Where did I put it now? Uh-oh, did I close my chat? Restore chat, and then I can pop it back out. I think I'd close the window there, pop out. Okay, that'll make it easier for me to read, just to see if anything else came in. Okay, Robert, that was your question before. If you want to build it without media queries, definitely look into Clamp. I have a video that I did on it. We could look at it quickly in a few minutes. But yeah, Clamp's just saying it's a lot like using viewport units, but you're also setting a minimum and maximum size at the same time. So actually, you'll see when I was looking at my code on the extra large font size I have, you'll see I'd set up a clamp there. So that can be useful. Peter Jansen's asking on the CSS Demystified site why I used RGBA instead of 8-digit hex codes. Mostly because 8-digit hex codes mean nothing to me. Even hex codes mean nothing to me. And well, not nothing. I know what red, blue, and green are, and then I know how to do yellow and like some other colors. I use hex codes usually because I have a design that I've already done, and it's in Figma or XD, and then I'm just copying and pasting those values in. And I'm too lazy to switch it over to RGB is the main reason I use hex. If it's the reason I would go to RGB is just because then I can understand my alpha value. The 8-digit hex, and trying to figure out what, like if I need 50% opacity, I literally don't know what I need to put there. I could figure out what 50 is, but I don't find it's worth the mental capacity personally. And even, I mean, if anything, HSL is the best color system that you could use. If you're going to pick one color system that you want to be super predictable, super easy to understand, and super easy to use, I'd go with HSL. I think it's the best one. It takes a little bit of a learning curve to get it compared to RGB, I think. But once you understand how it works and where colors are on the 360-degree wheel, it's just, you have so much more control. Prabin's asking, how can we use this custom properties in Sass so that we can still have these custom properties in compiled CSS? That's exactly what I did in my CSS Demystified site. Okay, this I don't need right now. I have too many windows open. Sorry, everybody. So if we go and look back in VS Code, all I did is I made a root partial that just set up my code. So I did like literally root, and I just put all my custom properties here, like a regular CSS file. And then in my, like at one point I was actually doing stuff where I'd set things up, and then I would come through and actually say that like font size 300 is my var font size 300. You could technically do that too, just because I liked writing this more than I liked writing that. But I've gotten away from that. The setup for it's a little bit long for me. You could also set up something, I guess, that's like a JSON file that can automatically do something like that for you, but it seems like a lot of work for nothing, personally. Yeah, in my Sass, I just set it all up like this, and I just, I just write regular CSS. So if I look in my weeks, probably, you can see like here I use my spacer. That's the only one I use, but I'm just writing regular CSS pretty much, and using my custom properties like custom properties. Did someone have a VS Code extension that can autocomplete custom properties defined in another file? Let me write that down. Custom, someone did. Custom prop extension and color rise. I'm going to send those out as part of the email. I'll probably send the email tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, did it get mentioned? No. Okay. Dave has recently started using 8-digit hex codes almost exclusively. I mean, if you understand how the last two ones work and you're comfortable with that scale, and I guess you know that FF is 100%, I guess, and then so FF is 100%, 00 would be 0%, and then you know that it, like, where's 50% though? Whatever, you know what the scale is and you're comfortable with it, it's fine. I think that if you're working with other people on a team, they would hate it. I think people would get mad at you if you used it, but 50% is 80, maybe. Tim, your day job just just blew up. I hope everything's okay. Peter's saying that FF is 255. It's 255 for the colors, but because you can do it here, just so just in case people are unaware, you could come in with color and then do, like if I did FF, so that's 255. So here, let's do it 250, a little off top. We'll do something like that. So that would be the exact same thing as doing color RGB 255, 0, 255. So you could do, these are equivalent. You can even see the colors the same for both of them. So FF is full value, 0, 0 is nothing. And so the first two are my R, the second two G, and these two here are my B. But now you can also do 8-digit hex codes. So I could come in here with an FF. This would be the same as coming here and doing 1. So the last two here are coming, like this is, the last two are my alpha value, RGBA, there. And actually, you can do RGB and include an alpha and it does work, but don't do it. But you can. If ever you make a typo, it's okay. Just to show you, if I do RGB and I put a 0.5 here, it worked. So just so you know. So that would be, is it 80? There we go. So 80 is equivalent to 2.5. And then so if I did a FF here, it's solid. And if I did a 0, 0 here, it would be transparent. So it looks black, but it's just transparent because the background behind it is black, right? So you could, I guess you can do an AA and it's going to have some value to it. It's just, I don't know what the scale is and I find it really hard to read. Whereas this, I just find looking at it, I can see it and understand it so much faster. So 80 is 80. If you need a 0.5, it's an 80. Which, for me, I don't like it. If it's something that works for you, I think that, and you get it, I don't think there's any issue with using it. It works fine. But I do think if you're working on a team with other people, they would not enjoy that. We have dev tools that can do stuff. I'm wondering if there's even like some prettier can't do it. I'm wondering if there's something that could like convert if you did something differently. I don't see any other questions coming in. If anybody has any other questions, don't be shy in the chat, please. But we do have a few more over here. Yeah, so this will be something I will be really diving into. So I'm not going to go into it more now. Do you still have to use hover when designing for mobile? No. Maybe. Mouse support has come to iOS, right? So be careful. And I know this is causing a lot of angst amongst app developers because it was never something that was a big thing, and now that there's mouse or pointer support on a lot of iOS devices coming, or that's here, I guess, it's a bit of a pain in the butt for iOS developers and for app developers in general, because it's this whole new, it's like a new thing that they never really had to worry about, and the way the pointer works is different from touch events and stuff, and like the zones, because there's a lot of things about like zones for if you're building a touch-based app, like even Apple has like minimum touch zones for stuff, and I think it's actually like they program differently when it's, I don't know enough about it because I don't do app development, but I was reading a huge Twitter thread on it that was fascinating to me. I tend to do it anyway. I'll put my hover in focus just because I'm so used to it, and I'm never, even if 95% of the people visiting your website are on mobile, there's going to be some people that aren't. So like I might as well put a hover. One thing, like I like playing with hover effects. I have a lot of YouTube videos that dive deep into hover stuff because you can do fun transitions and other things like that that you probably wouldn't want to do on a production site because half the users wouldn't be getting that experience, or more than half of them wouldn't be getting that experience. So you do have to be a little bit careful about using hover to be something that the user needs to interact with. So like if you need hover to see, like say you have a portfolio and like you see the picture, and then a lot of the time you can do like when you hover on top, like more information appears. If you're designing, like maybe that information should already be there on the mobile view, and it's only when you break past a certain breakpoint that you think about bringing that in. And even you can also, there are media queries for if the primary input is a pointer or not. So you could build different behaviors around that. So because somebody might be on like an iPad Pro that's above your breakpoint, but they're only on a touch base, So you don't really want it to be using hover to show information. So you could use a media query to look, are they using touch or are they, it's still a little iffy because it could be like if I'm on my laptop has a touch screen, but that's not my primary, like the primary is still considered the pointer, or I guess the trackpad, but it's like I have a mouse or a mouse pointer. So because I have a pointer, I might be using that website. I don't do it very much, but I might be using a website on the screen, and then I might be missing out on something. So you do have to be really careful with it. It is a big consideration, and it is a hard thing now that we're getting pointers on mobile devices and we have non-mobile devices that people can be touching on. So, you know, there is a big crossover happening now. So we do have, it is something you have to be very careful with. Yeah, okay, I can see that. So Peter mentioned with the hex code thing, if your background if your background's in computer science, it might be a lot easier to get your head around the whole hexadecimal thing. I could definitely see that. Um, I don't think I'm going to dive too deep unless a lot of people are curious about this in the chat. The second question I will. The first one, the difference between, I could do a little code pen. The difference between float and absolute position is a great question. Because there's a lot of behaviors that are actually super similar between the two, right? So when you float something, it comes out of the flow. When you use position absolute, it also comes out of the flow of the document. The biggest difference is something that's floated is still within its parent, sort of. And when you can also bring other things up, you can float other things, and if multiple things are floating, they're interacting with one another. And the whole float thing is such, I remember teaching this in the classroom, and the first time I was trying to plan my lesson for floats, I was just like, I had a good example and I had everything set up, and I'm sitting there going like, okay, I have my example. The example works really well. I was looking at floats, looking at clears. I had boxes. You could do different things. I was going to give the file to the students so they could play with it. And whenever you're teaching something, you want to come up with an analogy that's similar to something else in life or something else they've experienced. And there's nothing like floats that I could ever think of. And I looked at like 20 different YouTube videos and I read like 50 different blog posts, and I never found a good analogy of floats to something else we do. But it's, the way I always explain it is like, it's floating up, and it's not like a new Z index or anything. So like it's different from everything else in CSS, but you have this stuff down here and then you float, it's on a new level. And as soon as it's on a new level, then like all this other stuff can move underneath it. So that's why stuff goes underneath floats. Sort of, text doesn't, it's weird, ignore that. But things can go underneath floated items. But as soon as you float a second item, it's coming up on the same level, so now they're interacting again. So like the stuff on, it's like the clouds in the sky, they sort of can bump into each other, they can interact. Or if you had planes flying around, like the planes go over us, but they can bump into each other. Hopefully they don't. But you know, it's this idea of like two levels. It's floating in the air, so floated things interact. Whereas position absolute, there's no interaction there. Like once something's position absolute, it is out of the flow of the entire document. Everything pretends it's not there. It's on its own in its own world, and nothing can ever join it where it is. So I guess that's the main difference between it. There's also position absolute can be positioned relative to different things, whereas like a float is sort of stuck within its parent. You can't float and then make it leave and go somewhere else. A float is going to be within its parent, whereas position absolute, depending on the context, you could have it relative to the viewport, which is the default, or you could have it relative to its own parent or its grandparent, depending on how you set things up in your own CSS and where you've declared a position and stuff. So there is that difference between them, but they do come out of the flow of the document. Just floats are on like their own float context, whereas absolute is on its own context away from everything else. But hopefully you're not using floats for layout anymore, or absolute. Don't use position for layout either. They're both things that aren't meant for layout. And I've done a lot of position absolute for layout a long time ago. So if you have been using it, don't feel bad. But now, you know, we shouldn't be using floats or positioning for layouts. And then how to manage a layout's height, we don't. That's why We see a lot about width, but not about height, because we don't want to manage the height. Because if you try and manage the height, you run into problems. So the best example and the simplest example I always give is CodePen. Actually, this one's going to work. It's not what I was planning on. I'll do a new one, actually. The simplest example of this that I always like to give is lorem when you have... it's probably too much text. That's not. Okay, good. So if I have a paragraph with tons of text in it, and I shrink my site down, at one point, like if this is on mobile, the person's probably going to need to scroll to be able to see it. So like it needs to be tall. And if they're on a bigger screen, it gets shorter, and that's okay. So I talked about this actually in the last live stream when I looked at the intrinsic and extrinsic sizing. We were talking about how height is intrinsic and how that's a good thing. We want the height of elements most of the time, like 99% of the time probably. We want the height to be dependent on the content inside of them. There are times where maybe you do like a min height of 100 VH, so your minimum height is the same as the viewport, but then you want to be able to break out, like if something happens where the content gets longer because the screen got smaller or because of something else, you want to allow it. Because if you did P background red, just so we can see it a bit more, it's growing and it's shrinking, and that's a good thing. If I said height is 100 VH because I want it to be this big red background, well, that's working until this happens, and now it's busted and it's overflowing out the bottom. So one reason we don't talk about height is because we want to try and avoid it. Or we want to try and avoid setting explicit heights, because if we explicitly set a height, we're just going to run into problems. Is there any quick tips for keyboard accessibility for search icons so that autofocus on tab? You could technically do something like that, but I wouldn't. You could change the tab index, but changing tab indexes is the scariest thing in the world. And this is coming from someone who has like a very minor education in accessibility. I understand semantic HTML, and I understand enough about accessibility, hopefully not to cause any huge issues. Is the way I like to look at it, and I'm trying to learn more. I'm in conversation with a few accessibility experts to have them on my channel in the near future, and it's something that I'm always looking at improving. But having the first tab automatically go to search would probably be a bad experience for accessibility, not a good one. It would maybe be more convenient for people who are, if there's a way of making an expected behavior for somebody who's on a site, I could see it being a good thing. Or not a good thing. I could see it being a convenient thing in certain situations, but that's for people like us that aren't worried, like there's no accessibility issue, so we just want to get quickly to there by hitting tab. But for people who are actually navigating the site with the tab or with like a screen reader, I could see it being an issue. And if anybody in the chat can answer that better than me, by all means, I'll take other input there. Dave saying we're glad we're past the days of we needed to use float. Me too. Robert, can you use viewport to calculate? Of course we can. Of course, I'm saying it like it's that's where we can just use our viewport units for that, right? So sort of like, let's do it here. Actually, this will get into the clamp discussion then, since we're bringing it up, sort of. Oh, wait, 1 second. Frank, it's autocomplete if you're on the page of the root. Share the extension. Yeah, I don't know the extension yet. I have to find it. Visualize is for the colors. And then for the autocomplete, I'm going to see if there is anything. And if there is, I'll link it in the email I send out tomorrow. Okay, cool. So we're caught up in the chat. So for the font sizes, and sorry, I forgot who, was it Robert? Yeah, it was Robert. Okay, so we're talking. You know about the viewport units then. But anyway, we'll look at the clamp quickly. Let me just read the question again. Use viewport units to calculate, or use the viewport to calculate width and height of any given device, and use that calculation to manipulate like the font size. Right. So the basic way of doing that is font size 3 viewport width. So it's getting the width, and it's 3%. My font size is 3% of my viewport. So whatever I do, it's growing and shrinking, but we get this huge, massive issue where it grows and shrinks too much because it's a disaster. So the simple fix for that is doing a calc and saying like 1 rem plus 2 viewport units, or viewport width. So now it's always 1. So the small, like if this was at 0 width, our font size is 1. So we're starting at 1 and then we're getting bigger. But the problem is it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to infinity. And so that's where clamp comes in. And so there's no way of saying like, I mean, you could do it with, the other way is with media queries, right? Where you're setting like min and max width. So you said, if this is the viewport, use this font size. If this is the, well, you know, whatever, I'm saying it. We can say like at media, min width, min width, 320 pixels, and max width, 450 pixels. You could set a font size of 1 rem, or whatever, body. Okay, we'll do it properly. Body, font size 1 rem. And then we could, you know, this would be the older way of doing it, I guess. Then this would be 451 to 650. It goes up to 1.5. So let's just take this one off. So like, oh, did I get those backwards? I'm doing, I'm getting smaller? Did I break this one? What did I do wrong? Why does it get smaller here? I mucked something up, obviously. Nobody can see my code. Oh my god, guys. I've been live streaming for a while now, and I'm not any better at it than I was at the beginning. I'm so sorry. What did I do wrong? This is where I'm gonna move this over so you guys can see my code to help me. But this is where font size. It is 1.5. Oh, wait. I just wasn't going small enough. It was working the whole time. And I was just, I was going above 650 and it was shrinking back to normal. Okay, I did nothing wrong. 651, and then we'll just say that's like a min and it goes to 1.75. Okay, so if we're at a really small screen size, between there it's using 1. If we're going to there, it's going to jump up to this one. And then if we get to an even bigger size, then it's going to get up to this font size. So that would be like one way you could do it. It's a little bit like how I'm doing it now on CSS Demystified. I have a small size and I redefine it to a bigger size. So that's one way we can do it. But then if you don't want to do it that way, there is like the font size calc, not calc, clamp of, say 1 rem is your smallest, 5, we'll do 1 rem plus 5 viewport width is the scale it will grow at, and then we can do a 3 rem, or no, that's gonna be too big, 2 rem as my maximum size. This might give me an error because I have CSS on, so we'll switch back to no processor. So like now I have a minimum size. Let's just turn all these off because they might break some stuff. So I should have a minimum size of 1 rem, and then it will grow based on my screen size. Let's make this smaller. 0.5 all the way up to 3. And we'll make this smaller too. There we go. So it shrinks down at small screen sizes, it gets bigger at big screen sizes, and then at one point it reaches a maximum of 3 rem. But the hardest thing with this is just playing with this unit to get the scale down. There was an article on CSS tricks recently, actually, that I didn't read. I wanted to. I'm sort of keeping it in my mind. It's something I want to check out that does dive into it, about getting it to be perfectly linked to your screen size. I have one more. I'm not going to switch my screen here, so I can't lose my code. I'll just stay in this view. Dave, we don't need a calc in the middle. Whoops, let's go back to there really fast. I just saw that come up. If you're in a clamp, if it's when I had the CSS preprocessor on, I need to. If you're not using Sass, you don't need to. You can just do that. It works. Like here, let's make this bigger. You'll see it kicks in. There you go. It's getting smaller and it's getting bigger, and then it stops at 3. Clamp, and if you use clamp, min, or max, you can do the math in there. You don't need to add a calc. But before that, I had Sass on here. So I don't know if the newest version of Sass fixed this or not, but the one in CodePen hasn't. So if you have this on, I get an error because it says you can't mix these 2 units together. So if I wanted to do this in Sass, I actually do need to wrap it inside a calc, and then it will work. But if you're writing regular CSS, you don't need the calc in the middle. You can do any math you want. So that's cool. Last question that I had submitted was, actually I'm going to check after because maybe some came in after I put this presentation together. But talking about naming conventions, I'm trying to work on a plug and play set layout element and utility custom CSS classes that I can just apply for each project. I've looked at a number of them like BEM and Cube, etc. And they all, I wasn't sure what this was for. I wasn't sure if it was off or odd or something else. So I'm not sure, but I think they mean like too much, or my guess would be. So it looks like too much maybe for a simple project. Any pointers to implement action to stop things getting messy and confused? I would say that even though they might look like too much, if things are getting messy and confused, I would use one of them. Or find some sort, you need to have a naming convention and have a way that you plan on working. I have got more into nesting lately, and it is something, I'm not going to say it's the right way to work. I'm going to be looking at BEM, and I'm going to be looking at another way to work that's very similar to Cube in the course. And I'm sort of going to be presenting them as like, maybe this would be better, but like whatever works for you is what works. But having a naming convention is what we need to have. And even on a simple site, because often on a really simple site, you just start going. And then as you go, oh, I forgot to add this and I forgot to add this. And that's where the problems come in. And it's just because there's no naming convention that you're following. And then you end up with things that are conflicting with each other, and it becomes a little bit of a nightmare. Over the top. Aha. It looks like it's over the top for a simple project. Yeah. And that's one of the issues. I think Cube actually works. Cube can, if you look at Andy's, I'm going to have more YouTube content on it. I'm not going to dive specifically into Cube. I'm going to be using a lot of Cube's ideas in the course. But I'm going to have some YouTube content on it because I think people are a little bit overwhelmed when they look at the big picture of it. But at the base, it's super simple how it works. Like the idea behind Cube is very, very, very simple. And you can start at a really simple project and then add complexity to it. And I think however you do decide to work, having like a plan is always the best. So if you have the whole idea, it's always easier when you have more and you can work off of more than when you have not enough, if that makes sense. Like the more you can plan ahead of time, the easier things are going to be. But I know, like, even my example would be when I did this site, I was trying to get it up quickly. I had a design, I was modifying things on the fly. It did get a little bit messy for sure. And that's why, like, I know some people were looking at the code of it and being like, oh, I've been inspired by some stuff. And I'm like, oh, I hope they didn't look at that. There's a few things in here I'm not proud of, but they work. And I never really ran into naming issues, I think. So just like a really quick example, like here on, like, I don't mind, and just if you're not familiar, like here what I've done is I literally have week H3. And I wanted my H3 on my week to look different from other H3s. And it wasn't super different. You can see I just changed the maximum width of it and the padding on it. So like, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that and redefining and using the extra specificity on something. But just if you are doing this, you do have to be a little bit careful with that approach too. So that is something to be careful with. And that is sometimes where BEM does have an advantage, because you'd have something like week and then week title, or week, or you wouldn't even do it like that. You'd have week and then you'd have your styles, and then you'd have your week subtitle, and you could style that and do whatever you want on that. And it's not going to bleed out to anywhere else. This doesn't bleed out anywhere else either, because it's only for my H3s that are inside the week. It is one of those things too, like this site, now that I have it mostly where I am, I have some stuff to add to it. But once the course is out and I have some time to sit down, I'm just going to refactor it. So like, there's nothing wrong with having messy code and then going back up and fixing it after. I think somebody mentioned this earlier too. We see this a lot more in like JavaScript, because JavaScript, you can get literal performance improvements by refactoring, right? Whereas a CSS, a lot of time it's just messy, and sometimes maybe there's conflicts and other stuff. But by refactoring it after, so you're going in and cleaning it up and going like, even I have like notes in my file here, because if I go to my YouTube one, like this shouldn't even be in this partial. It should be in its own partial, but that's why I put for now here as a reminder to move this into its own file later on, or to move it somewhere else, because it doesn't really belong with this, because this is really specific styles for something else. So you can leave yourself notes too while you're doing something, because you know, maybe this isn't the best way to do it, but I'm going to throw it in here for now. Because if you started small and it's been growing and it's been getting messier and messier and messier, and you're running into issues, that's where maybe you sit down and you go, okay, now I've reached a point where I can actually start planning it. Because when I started, I needed to get something together, I needed to get it out there, and it's working and I'm happy, but it's getting hard to maintain. Okay, now I can look at the whole picture, I can actually plan things out, not necessarily to redo it from scratch, because that could be a pain, but maybe I can rethink of like, okay, this would make more sense if I renamed these things like this, or I see I'm repeating myself over and over and over. Could I make a utility class for that? And stuff like that could really help. OTT is over the top. Frank asking the snippets so you don't have to type var. That's built into VS Code. But it doesn't, like here I can't use it because I'm in a SAS file. But I think there's gonna be an extension, right? But video, if I just do color, I have nothing. I don't have access to anything here because I'm not in my root folder. It's only looking for ones that are in this specific file. So I'm gonna see if I can find something that can pull it from other files, if that even exists. I'm assuming it must. But I know, like, if I go to my root folder, selector, color, they just all show up. And then if I do color, it shows, like, this is a default VS Code behavior. And then as soon as I choose one, so I can just choose the one I want, it does it for me. I don't see any other questions coming in the chat. So if anybody has any, we're going to start wrapping up. But yeah, we're close to the end here. That went to the 2 hours that I was, I didn't think we'd take this long, but it doesn't, we're all good. I'm happy that we got through everything I wanted to get through, and it seemed to be timed really good. But if anybody has any more questions, don't be shy. You can drop them off in here. And actually, while I'll leave this up, I'm going to pull this. I'm going to see just really fast if there was any other questions that came up after. Well, there was a few other questions. Okay, 3 more questions. Let's see. Oh, that's a long one. Okay, I'll just pull these up here. I might not answer all of it, but we'll see. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Can I make this bigger so everybody can see? I've had issues to handle the width and height of several cases. Dynamically add children bound to the parent container width and height without extending it. Height for specific scroll area should be bound to parent height. Okay. Handle position element responsively on runtime. Get width and height of a container which is fit to screen in order to draw the child container. Let me think for a second. I'm going to come back. I struggle with keeping... Oh, okay, we already did that one. I was wondering about... Oh, I named that. I did that one already. These aren't in the order. Okay. Or I missed this one before. WordPress heavy theme, including a page builder. I noticed something odd. When opening a page, elements, noticeably links, styles as a button, are styled according to the theme, and they change to the style defined for each element as defined in the page builder. So you actually see the styling change. Oh my goodness, that's weird. That is interesting. That must be something with how the page builder's injecting the CSS, which would be weird. It almost sounds like it's using JavaScript to add another CSS file. Or there's the only other thing I think is like there's a render blocking thing like in the head of the document, because the heads of WordPress sites can be a mess somehow, and it could be that what's happening is it's loading the theme, so all of that's coming in. Then it's loading in something with the page builder, so there's some JavaScript involved there, or something being like some runtime JavaScript from the page builder, and then there's the link for this page builder CSS file, so like that JavaScript file is render blocking or something. You might be able to set like an async on some there to try and fix it. The only thing, maybe someone in the chat can help out on that, because I honestly I can't stand the page builders just because I find they slow things down so much. I've never seen anything like that. But there's something that's causing the CSS not to load in. So there's some render blocking something happening. Maybe you could get a plugin just to make sure everything's loading in asynchronously. I know there's plugins for WordPress that do that. So it's gonna. I actually broke a site by putting that in once, so be careful with it. But if you can load in everything on async, it can help the performance a lot. And then it's not waiting for that JavaScript file to load before it loads in the CSS. That's the only thing I can think of. Soon I'll be migrating some Bootstrap-inspired sites toward using Flexbox or Grid. Any tips or pitfalls? Any tips or pitfalls? I've never done it. Plan things out. Like, how are you going to replace? Like, if you're, that's a lot of work. But like, I guess I'd be looking at the sites a lot to see like what parts of Bootstrap they're using. Are they using offsets? Like, they're obviously using the grid. So from the grid, are they then using offsets or no offsets? Because that's going to be, if they're using offsets on the grid to push things around a little bit, that could be a pain in the butt. So I'd be looking at that. I'd be looking at how much they rely on jQuery, and you might want to keep jQuery and like poppers. Well, it depends what version of Bootstrap it was, but you might want to keep those at least at the beginning, depending on how much like. Yeah, watch out for. I would be really careful with the JavaScript dependencies, because there is a lot of jQuery that goes in, and just like even the navigation, right? Like it's simple enough, but there's a lot of functionality linked between the navigation and that, or if there's like the carousel, like there's some things. Replacing the grid, depending on how they're using it, could be not that bad. Replacing some other stuff could be a lot of work. So I'd sit down and plan everything out, and then see like what are ways to do it. I would say, is it really worth it? Would be like, if the site's going to be identical, I wouldn't just, or if it's a learning experience for you, that could be fantastic. If it's just to do it because to do it, I don't know. Other than learning, if it's because moving forward there's like updates that are happening, and it would it would be better to be running on its own system, then maybe you could make that would be fine. Or like there's use cases for grid and it's not set up for that. That would be perfectly fine too. But I would do a lot of planning to see like, how am I going to replace, this is what Bootstrap is doing, how can I replace that without the whole thing falling apart? Yeah. So we did that one. I'm just going to run through here quickly. We did that. I did that one. This is one I didn't look at. It's weird they're not in order, because I went from top to bottom when I made that before. I have a header with a 5 rem of height, a main container that fills all of the height that left for the viewport, and a child inside that fits its parent's height of 100%. But when I set autoflow to auto to the child and its content is larger than the body, will scroll. So if you set the height to 100%, might be going to not what you think it is part of it. Maybe. Why are you setting overflow to auto on the child? It could be the content that's inside. I would be saying like this, do you need an overflow set? I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish with that. I'm always worried when you max heights. Anything with height scares me, like I sort of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Mel saying that the WordPress theme I was talking about is probably using inline style injection. The page builder is inline. And before that, numerous yeah. So the JavaScript's loading in, and then it's injecting all of the CSS. So it has to load the JavaScript file in, and then it has to inject everything. So it's a page builder. I don't know if there's a solution, to be honest. It's always been one of my complaints about page builders is they're slow. Prebin's asking if I have any startup base CSS file. We're gonna have one when we finish the course. It won't be much of one, but it's gonna be like a nice reset that we can use, as well as some utility classes that I guess it'll be one part of one file, but we'll have a reset that we can always be using and that you can build on top of, because it's going to be a little bit minimalist. But I'm going to sort of explain my thought process on that. We're slowly going to, like the first week we do 2 things in it. The next week after that we'll add a few more, and we're going to add a few utility classes that we're going to be using a lot. So we can sort of have a little bit of a base CSS file that can be really useful all the time. Bye Mel, thanks for hanging out. A lot of people are dropping off, so let's just finish this up and see. There's that last question that was again okay, so this sounds like dynamically add I'd like to see what's happening here, actually, to be honest. If you're not in the Discord community already, maybe come and join in the Discord community. Dynamically add, because I think we could, if I saw the examples of it, or other people in there too could help out as well. Dynamically add child bound to the parent container width and height without extending it. I mean, the simplest, maybe, depending on the simplest solution, there would be the parent is position relative, and then the child is position absolute, top, bottom, left, right, all set to 0, and then it's going to match the height of the parent. That would be the simplest thing. It would just be like overlaying on top of the parent. Height for specific scroll area should be bound to the parent height. So if your height, this is a little bit like that question above. So let's just jump into CodePen. If you have a parent, heights are a little strange when you're, whoops, that's not what I wanted. Oh, it is. I want to change my view just so the font size is bigger for you guys. If you have a parent, so here, let's try and set up an example like he said before. So we have a parent, it has, let's just say it has a header, hello, and then it has a child div, child, with a paragraph with some lorem in it. And let's say that the parent has a height of 75 viewport height and a background of light blue. I'm also going to add one more thing here, box sizing border box, just so I can add some padding without changing. This might be one of the issues. Also, padding 2M. If you're not using border box and you're setting a height and you're adding padding, the heights of things might not match up how you think they will. So if I said my header has a height of 10 VH and a background of pink, just so we can see it. So there's my header. And then I want this child, so we'll give that dot child. Dot child could be background green, light green. So we get that there. The easiest way, if you need this child to fill, let me just go back to this for a second. Height of a specific scroll area should be bound to the parent height. Okay, we'll sort of answer this hopefully at the same time. So if I have this, if I said height is 100%, it's sticking out the bottom because it's getting the height of 100 VH from my parent here. So the height of this one is the same as the height of, it's getting this height of 100 VH. Now if I turn off my header for a second, this could be an issue. Just again, this is where my padding's coming in. So the height of this one is 75 VH, but because of the padding, I think, that's coming onto there, it is causing a bit of an issue. But you could do something like this if you needed to make sure that the child is the height of the parent, and then you could have an overflow scroll or something if you needed, right? So if this text was really long, overflow scroll, and then that area becomes scrollable. For that other question, honestly, I think the easiest thing wouldn't be to do this with a height of 100. I think the easiest would be on the parent doing a display of flex, and then a flex direction of column, and then a justify content stretch. Right? Or not? Definitely using flex would be the right idea here, though. Column means, I'm just trying to not mix myself up. I've been really getting mixed up lately with justify and align content for some reason. Let me just think. I'm going to look at the chat while I think about this for a second. A few people saying thank you. Peter doesn't like page builders either. Yeah, I mean, there's the idea of them, I understand, but they're just so slow. Michael saying, it would be fantastic if you created, I have a paid course on SAS, it's just not, yeah, child, flex, grow, one. There we go. Thank you, David. Bonne journée. Oh, that was Edison. But thank you, David. Have a good evening. And thank you, Edson. There we go. Yeah, I have a paid course, but it's been closed for over a year now, I think. So once I'm finished with CSS Demystified, I have some other stuff to work on, and then I'll eventually be reworking that SAS course completely and reopening it. That's the plan, actually. When I finish this, I have some Scrimba work to do, and then I'll be back on my SAS course, which is going to take a lot of diving back into, because there's stuff, a lot of the really advanced stuff I haven't used in a while, so I need to dive really deep back into that and start using it a lot in my YouTube stuff and get prepared for the SAS stuff again. But there we go. So like this is just filling up the empty space. So whatever the empty space there is, 80, it's, you know, it doesn't matter. It's always going to fill up the available space. So hopefully that answers that question from up above. Handle, this one I'm not sure about. Handle position element responsively on runtime. I'm not, like, you could be using percentages and stuff, so it's based on the viewport or its parent's position. But in general, I try not to use position too much because it can be hard to make responsive. And the width and the height of the container fit to screen to draw the children, I would just use viewport units. So like here I could do height and then width, 80 viewport width, margin, auto. It won't do it on the top and bottom, but like I could have it, the width is 80%, the height is 80% of the viewport height, and then everything could be drawn inside of that. That would be my solution there. And I think that is it for me today. Ugh, I can't speak. I've been talking too much. I think that is it for me today. Yeah, so I'm going to be emailing you all with, if there's any other questions, get them in fast. I'm going to be emailing everybody over the weekend with the link to this, as well as any VS Code extensions that I stumble across. I'll dive into that. And then, as I said, the course should be out in 3 weeks. So the 26th, I think that's 3 weeks from now. The 26th of October, you should be getting the content for the course. Maybe you guys get a little bit of a sneak peek because I might test out getting everything organized on all of you first. So maybe you'll get access a little bit earlier than that. It's a possibility. I'm not promising anything. But you are in your own bundle, so it is possible you get a little bit early access. Next week, I'll probably be sending out something about joining the Discord too. And if you're already in the Discord, about how you can get the role if you don't already have the role for the Discord. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you for the questions. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope it was a good one for you. Thanks for the help there on that last thing, Edson. Peter, thank you for hanging out. John, Prabin, Frank, and Keith. Mel, I know you're gone, but just in case you're watching the replay, thank you for hanging out and for the help. Bastiman, and everyone else. Yeah. Dave Collison, Alessander. I'm just running through the chat fast here. Those are the names I see the most often coming up. So thank you guys. Robert, of course, thank you for the question and for hanging out. It's been fun. I had fun with this one. If you don't already, follow me over on Twitch too if you enjoy these live sessions. They're a little less formal with less prepared lessons, but I am streaming twice a week over on Twitch as well, in case you weren't sure. I probably won't be doing another live one with you guys just because I have to focus a lot on the course over the next 2 weeks to get everything ready and to market it and all of that stuff to go along with it too. But then so the 26th is when the course is going to launch. If there's any delays in that, I'll let you know way ahead of time. But the 26th is when the course should be launching, so we'll probably be doing the next live session on the 30th. That would be the plan. Glad you liked the session, Jeff. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you guys. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate all of you for jumping in and supporting me with this course and giving me a little bit of a leap of faith. I know I've had a few questions about the big package, so I'll have news about that for you guys too. Next week, maybe, or the week after. Before the course is out, you'll have more information about that for you and how it's going to work for all of you guys. So have a fantastic end of your day, wherever you are, if you're going to bed or if you're just waking up or whatever it is. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully it's Friday or Saturday for everybody. So it's not a bad place to be, end of the week. So enjoy yourselves, take care of yourselves, be safe, and yeah, have a nice weekend, everyone. Anybody who's in Canada, happy Thanksgiving. We're weird Canadians. We do our Thanksgiving in October. So happy Thanksgiving if anyone else is in Canada. And yeah, have a nice long weekend if that is the case for you. So now I have to find my end stream button because I can never find it. There it is. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.